What if I told you that in America, you can legally fly certain aircraft without a pilot's license? Not a myth, not a loophole from the internet, a real part of federal law. Under FAA, Part 103, a small group of ultralight aircraft can take to the sky with almost no bureaucracy at all. No pilot certificate, no aviation medical, no aircraft registration. But once you see what people have built inside those rules, things get wild. Because this list includes enclosed ultralights, amphibious aircraft, powered paragliders, and even helicopters. So today, we are counting down 10 aircraft you can fly without a pilot's license. And the higher we go, the crazier it gets. Number 10, Airlite 103. We begin with an aircraft that wears its mission right in the name, the Airlite 103. And honestly, that makes it the perfect entry point for this countdown. The Airlite 103 is not trying to look exotic. It is not trying to act like a tiny jet. And it is definitely not trying to impress people with luxury. What it does instead is much more important. It embodies the exact spirit of Part 103 aviation: simplicity, affordability, legality, and direct access to flight. According to the source material you gave me, the Airlite 103 was designed by Terry Raber, first introduced in 1997, and originally produced by Aero Works in Ohio. Production eventually stopped when the manufacturer shut down, but the design did not disappear. Raber later regained the rights, updated the aircraft, and helped bring it back, which says a lot about how practical and durable the concept really was. And the concept itself is beautifully straightforward. This is a single-seat, high-wing pusher ultralight. That means the wing sits above the pilot, the engine is mounted behind, and the whole aircraft is arranged around clean visibility and efficient simplicity. That layout is classic in the ultralight world because it works. It keeps the structure light, gives the pilot a strong field of view, and avoids unnecessary complexity. What makes the Airlite 103 special is not that it dominates one category, it is that it represents the entire category so well. When people imagine the idea of an aircraft you can legally fly without a license, this is the kind of machine that brings the concept down to earth and makes it believable. It is practical. It is intentionally simple. It feels like something built around the idea that flight should still be possible for regular people. And that idea matters more than ever. Because modern aviation often feels expensive, regulated, and distant from ordinary life. The Airlite 103 pushes in the opposite direction. It says that flight can still be direct, still personal, still accessible. And sometimes, that kind of simplicity is more exciting than complexity. That is why it opens the list. Not because it is the most shocking aircraft here, but because it captures the core promise behind all the others: real flying with minimal red tape and maximum freedom. Number 9, Kolb Firefly. At number 9, we move to a machine that has earned its place by doing something many modern aircraft fail to do: being simple without being disposable. The Kolb Firefly is one of those aircraft that does not need flashy promises to stay relevant. It has survived because it works. It is a lightweight, practical American ultralight that has spent years proving that a straightforward design can still deliver real joy in the air. According to the source material, the Firefly evolved from the earlier Kolb Firestar, was produced in Kentucky, and was specifically designed to stay within the strict 254-pound empty weight limit required by Part 103. Its forward fuselage uses welded 4,130 steel tubing. The tail boom is made from aluminum to keep weight down. The wings are built from riveted aluminum tubing, and the control surfaces are fabric covered in classic ultralight style. It also features folding wings, which makes storage and transport dramatically easier. Power typically comes from a Rotax 447 engine, producing around 40 horsepower, and cruise speed sits around 60 miles per hour. Now, none of those numbers sound outrageous, and that is exactly the point. The Firefly is not trying to overwhelm you with some crazy gimmick. It is trying to be a trustworthy ultralight that delivers honest, predictable, fun flying. That may sound less dramatic than helicopters or amphibious aircraft, but in the real world, that is a huge strength. Because when people first enter ultralight aviation, What they usually need is not madness. They need confidence. They need a machine that feels proven, a machine that feels understandable, a machine that does not look like a dare. And that is where the Firefly shines. It feels like the kind of aircraft that belongs to someone who loves flying for its own sake, not just for the spectacle of it. It folds up, it stores more easily, it stays inside the rules. And it carries with it the kind of reputation that only comes from years of actual use, not marketing fantasy. That is why it makes this list. Because freedom in aviation is not only about how radical an aircraft looks, sometimes it is about how consistently a machine gives people access to the sky without trying to pretend it is something it is not. And the Kolb Firefly does that beautifully. Number 8. BlackHawk LowBoy 3. At number 8, the whole concept starts to loosen up. Because now we are leaving behind the shape most people imagine when they hear airplane and stepping into something even more stripped down, more exposed, and more visceral. The BlackHawk LowBoy 3. This aircraft sits in the powered paraglider world, and that alone gives it a completely different energy from the fixed-wing ultralights around it. Where something like the Airlite or Firefly still feels structurally airplane-like, the LowBoy 3 feels much more like raw flight distilled to its essence. According to your source, it weighs around 190 pounds, uses 6,061 large-diameter aluminum tubing, includes Tundra tires and stronger fiberglass axles for rougher ground handling, and is designed to collapse easily for transport using quick-release pins. It also has a multi-positional hang point system, allowing pilots to adjust the center of gravity and change the handling characteristics. Takeoff distance is around 50 to 75 feet, and landing can happen in as little as 25 feet. Those takeoff and landing numbers are absolutely wild, because they change the scale of the whole flying experience. No big runway, no formal strip, no heavy infrastructure, just open space, a wing overhead, and enough room to rise into the air. That is part of what makes powered paraglider trikes so fascinating. They take one of aviation's oldest fantasies, the dream of just lifting off from almost nowhere, and make it feel weirdly real. The LowBoy 3 especially leans into that sense of convenience. It is collapsible, rugged enough for rougher ground, and built to feel accessible rather than intimidating. And there is another reason it stands out. It completely changes the emotional feel of flight. A lot of aircraft still separate you from the air. Cabin walls, windows, insulation, instruments, all of that creates distance. But something like the LowBoy 3 puts you right into the experience. It is open, immediate, and personal. It makes flying feel less like operating a machine and more like stepping directly into the sky. That is not going to appeal to everyone. Some people want structure. Some want enclosed safety. Some want more airplane and less exposure. But for the right person, the BlackHawk LowBoy 3 is not merely a legal ultralight option. It is the purest form of flying on the list, and that is why it lands here. Number 7, Affordaplane. At number 7, we get to one of the most important aircraft in the entire ultralight story, not because it is the most beautiful, the fastest, or the strangest, but because it may be one of the most empowering. The Affordaplane is exactly what the name suggests, an aircraft built around accessibility. And that changes everything. Because in aviation, cost is often the wall people slam into first. Before they ever worry about training, hangars, or regulations, they hit the price barrier. That is why the Affordaplane matters so much. It turns the question from, can I ever afford to fly, into, could I actually build my own way into the sky? According to your source, the Affordaplane has been around for more than 20 years and is an all-aluminum, single-seat design that can be built either as a Part 103 ultralight or as a light sport aircraft, depending on configuration. In ultralight form, it weighs exactly 254 pounds, cruises around 55 miles per hour, offers roughly 150 miles of range, and is typically powered by a 3.5 horsepower Rotax 377. The script also notes that heavier engines such as the Rotax 503 can be installed, but doing so pushes the aircraft beyond the Part 103 ultralight weight limit. That flexibility is part of what makes it so compelling. But the real heart of the Affordaplane is the build culture around it. This is not a machine designed only for buyers who want something polished and ready-made. It is built for people who want to understand their airplane, build their airplane, and then fly something they created with their own hands. That is an entirely different emotional experience from simply purchasing aviation access. It turns flying into something personal and earned, and that is rare. Because a lot of modern aviation is built around distance, distance between user and machine, distance between owner and builder, distance between dream and reality. The Affordaplane reduces that distance dramatically. It says the sky is still something a regular person can physically work toward piece by piece. That is powerful. It is not flashy power. It is not luxury power. It is not performance power. It is ownership power. And that is exactly why it deserves a strong place on this list. Number 6, Merlin Lite. At number 6, we get to an aircraft that changes one of the biggest assumptions people make about ultralights, that they are only good for short hops. The Merlin Lite proves otherwise. Because this is not just some minimal local flyer built for 10 minutes above a farm field. According to your source, the Merlin Lite is a fully enclosed ultralight with a 5-gallon wing tank, roughly 4 hours of endurance, a cruise speed of around 63 miles per hour, and a range of over 260 miles. It also delivers takeoff and landing distances under 150 feet, which is an extraordinary combination of short field performance and genuine cross-country potential. The script notes that its 271-pound empty weight would normally exceed the standard Part 103 limit, but with a BRS rescue parachute system, it can remain compliant under the safety device allowance. And that is what makes the Merlin Lite so fascinating. It stretches the ultralight idea farther than most people expect. A lot of people hear ultralight and imagine something that is basically limited to local fair weather fun. They imagine quick pattern work, maybe a short sunset flight, maybe a little recreational buzz over the countryside. But the Merlin Lite starts to push beyond that mental box. With that kind of endurance and that kind of range, the aircraft begins to feel like a machine that can actually go somewhere. Not in the airline sense, not in the business jet sense, but in the deeply personal, exploratory sense. The kind of flight where you launch at sunrise, follow rivers or roads or open land, and genuinely cover distance. The kind of aircraft that makes the map feel larger because your options suddenly feel larger. And then there is the cockpit. That matters, too. Because a fully enclosed ultralight changes the emotional experience of flying. It reduces exposure, makes the aircraft feel more refined, and gives the whole machine a slightly more mature presence than the open-frame stereotype most people still associate with this category. It feels less like a backyard experiment and more like a serious, lightweight traveling machine. That is why the Merlin Lite belongs here. It does not just fit inside the rules. It pushes against the edges of what people think those rules can produce. And whenever an aircraft can do that, it becomes a lot more than just another ultralight. It becomes a conversation changer. Number 5, Aventura UL. At number 5, the runway disappears completely. Because the Aventura UL is where ultralight aviation stops caring about whether you are on land or water and simply decides it wants both. This is an amphibious ultralight built for exploration, and that alone already makes it one of the most captivating aircraft in the script. According to your source, the Aventura UL is manufactured by Aero Adventure in Florida, can operate from water, sand, grass, snow, and pavement, and is capable of taking off and landing in under 320 feet. Its structure uses an aluminum wing frame, Dacron covering, a fiberglass hull, polyethylene wingtip floats, and anodized aluminum tubing for strength without excess weight. It is powered by a Rotax 277 engine, cruises around 62 miles per hour, offers a range of about 250 miles, and sits in the roughly $30,000 to $32,500 price range. Now stop for a second and think about how unusual that really is. You are talking about a flying machine that can lift off from a lake in the morning, land on grass later in the day, and still remain part of this strange, no-license ultralight universe. That is an incredible amount of freedom, because one of the biggest limits in aviation is always infrastructure. Where can you land? What kind of runway do you need? How much support does the aircraft demand once you arrive? The Aventura UL attacks that problem directly by making the answer much simpler. Far more places than you think. And that changes the emotional appeal of the aircraft completely. This is not just flight. This is exploration. It turns shorelines into possibilities. It turns small lakes into gateways. It turns mixed terrain into opportunity. That is why the Aventura UL feels so much bigger than its size. It unlocks a kind of geography that many people still associate only with bush pilots, seaplane legends, and adventure documentaries. But here it is, living inside the Part 103, adjacent ultralight world, and making that dream feel oddly attainable. That is a very rare trick. And it is why the Aventura UL lands at number 5. Because once an aircraft lets you stop asking, where is the runway, and start asking, where do I want to go, it has already done something special. Number 4, Swan 103, Swan 120. At number 4, ultralights stop looking primitive and start looking futuristic. The Swan 103, known in Europe as the Swan 120W, is one of the cleanest examples in the script of an aircraft that breaks people's expectations before it ever leaves the ground. According to your source, it features a fully enclosed cockpit, a carbon fiber and glass fiber epoxy airframe, an empty weight of just 244 pounds, a 7-foot length, and a 2-foot wingspan. It can also fold down for transport and storage, uses a Pinny-Thor 3003 engine producing 38 horsepower, cruises around 62 miles per hour, and offers roughly 200 miles of range. The base price is given at around $33,000, rising closer to $43,000 with parachute, radio gear, and trailer package included. This is where the ultralight category suddenly feels far more modern than most outsiders expect. Because when many people think of license-free or no-certificate ultralight flying, they imagine exposed tubing, fabric surfaces, open seating, and a machine that looks like it belongs in a field more than a hangar. The Swan destroys that image. It looks polished. It looks deliberate. It looks aerodynamic in a way most people would not associate with this category at all. And that matters. Because perception is part of the battle with ultralights. A lot of people dismiss them before they ever look closely. They assume the category is crude, improvised, and visually unsophisticated. The Swan 103 steps in and says no ultralights can be refined, enclosed, sleek, and visually modern while still staying rooted in the same lightweight philosophy. And then there is the practicality. The fact that it can fold for transport and storage is not just a neat trick. It changes ownership. It changes cost. It changes where the aircraft can live. A machine that can be stored in a trailer rather than depending fully on hangar infrastructure becomes much easier to imagine as part of real life. That is a big deal in a category that is all about reducing barriers. The Swan 103 feels like the aircraft on this list most likely to make a non-pilot stop and say, wait, that counts as an ultralight? And when an aircraft can do that while still remaining legal, compact, and apparently practical, it deserves a very high ranking. Number 3, Mirocopter SCH-2A. At number 3, things start getting even more unbelievable. Because now we are talking about a real helicopter. Not a toy. Not a concept. Not some internet fantasy machine. The correct name is the Mirocopter SCH-2A, and it is one of the lightest manned coaxial helicopters in the world. Mirocopter and its US distributor describe it as a Slovenian-built small coaxial helicopter that complies with US FAR Part 103. That alone makes it extraordinary, because most people do not expect to hear the words helicopter and no pilot license required in the same sentence. And the specs are what make it truly shocking. The SCH-2A has an empty weight of 249 pounds, which puts it inside the Part 103 limit without depending on the kind of flotation or parachute allowance that some other aircraft need. It is powered by a Fiat MZ 202 two-cylinder, dual-ignition, two-stroke gasoline engine, producing more than 60 horsepower. Maximum speed is listed at 62 miles per hour, cruise speed at 50 miles per hour, and fuel capacity at 5 US gallons, with roughly 1 hour of cruise flight time. What makes the SCH-2A even more fascinating is the way it flies. This is a true coaxial helicopter with standard helicopter control inputs. Vertical lift comes from collective blade pitch control. Directional control comes from cyclic pitch, and yaw is controlled by moving tail plates instead of using a conventional tail rotor. That gives it a very unusual profile and allows it to operate in tighter areas while lifting more useful weight than a comparable tail rotor layout might allow. Mirocopter also says the aircraft was developed and tested for more than 10 years, and that it has very good flight characteristics, including effective auto-rotation. And that is exactly why it ranks so high. Because the Mirocopter SCH-2A does not just stretch the idea of ultralight aviation, it completely changes what most people think is possible inside it. A real helicopter. A real ultralight. And legally, in the right context, a machine that fits inside one of the lightest regulatory categories in American aviation. That is hard to forget. Number 2, Composite-FX XEL Mosquito. At number 2, we stay in helicopter territory, but now the wow factor gets even bigger. The correct name here is the Composite-FX XEL Mosquito. Composite-FX describes itself as the manufacturer of the XE series helicopters, commonly known as the Mosquito, and the XEL is the model that qualifies as an ultralight aircraft in the United States under Part 103 of the FAA regulation. That alone makes this aircraft extraordinary. Because when most people hear the words "no pilot's license required," they do not imagine a helicopter. They imagine something tiny, open, simple, and maybe a little rough around the edges. But the XEL Mosquito is a real single-seat helicopter with real vertical takeoff capability and a design that feels far more serious than outsiders expect. And the numbers explain why it stands out. Composite-FX says the XEL is powered by the MZ 202 engine and equipped with floats, weighs 312 pounds. The company lists a maximum airspeed of 70 miles per hour, a cruise speed of 62.5 miles per hour, an estimated climb rate of 900 feet per minute, 5 gallons of fuel capacity, and an estimated flight time of 45 minutes. Pricing is shown at $58,000 for the kit and $77,000 factory finished. And that is where the aircraft becomes so memorable. This is not just an ultralight curiosity. It is one of the most recognizable personal ultralight helicopters ever built. Composite-FX even markets the XE line as the world's premier single-seat, experimental, and ultralight helicopters, which tells you exactly how the company sees this aircraft family. That is why the Composite-FX XEL Mosquito ranks at number 2. Because it takes one of the most unbelievable ideas in personal aviation, a legal ultralight helicopter, and turns it into something real, documented, and surprisingly well-developed. Number 1, Airdrome Aeroplanes Fokker D-VIII. And now we arrive at number 1. Because if this countdown is about the coolest aircraft you can fly without a pilot's license, then the top spot has to go to the one that feels the most outrageous, the most cinematic, and the most unforgettable. The correct name is the Airdrome Aeroplanes Fokker D-VIII, a 3/4 scale replica of the legendary First World War parasol wing fighter. Airdrome lists it specifically as Fokker D-VIII 3/4 scale, and the aircraft has become one of the most distinctive historical replicas available in lightweight kit form today. And this is where the whole story becomes almost surreal, because this is not just an ultralight. It is a flying piece of history. The aircraft keeps the visual character that made the original Fokker D-VIII so striking: the parasol wing, the narrow fighter stance, the old-school monoplane profile, and that unmistakable World War I silhouette. But instead of being a museum artifact, this modern version uses updated construction and modern engines to make the experience accessible in a much more practical way. Airdrome's page shows 2 main variants: an EXP version at about 275 pounds with a Rotax 503 and 52 horsepower, and a UL version at about 253 pounds with a Rotax 377 and 35 horsepower. That is what makes this aircraft such a perfect number one. It is not the most practical machine on the list. It is not the fastest. And it is definitely not the most conventional. But it does something no other aircraft here can quite match. It makes aviation history feel personally reachable. You are not just flying an ultralight. You are flying something that looks like it rolled straight out of 1918. And when an aircraft can deliver that much personality, that much nostalgia, and that much visual drama while still living in the lightweight experimental, ultralight world, it becomes almost impossible to top. That is why the Airdrome Aeroplanes Fokker D-VIII takes the number one spot. Because the coolest aircraft on a list like this is not always the most logical one. Sometimes it is the one that makes the imagination explode the moment you see it. So there you have it, 10 aircraft you can fly without a pilot's license. From simple, practical ultralights to enclosed futuristic designs, from amphibious explorers to powered paragliders, and from true helicopters to a World War I fighter replica, one thing becomes very clear. Ultralight aviation is far stranger, far more creative, and far more exciting than most people realize. A lot of people think flying always begins with years of training, massive costs, bureaucracy, and barriers. But FAA Part 103 created a strange little doorway into the sky, one where the rules are lighter, the machines are wilder, and the dream of flying feels much closer to ordinary people than they ever expected. Now I want to hear from you. Which one would you fly first? The Swan? The Aventura? The helicopter? Or the Fokker D-VIII? Drop your answer in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe to Unbox the World, hit the like button, and turn on notifications so you do not miss the next one. Because we have a lot more incredible aircraft, hidden aviation stories, and machines that push the limits of flight coming your way. So stay with us, and I will see you in the next video.